The diplomatic hall on the starship Eminence was a marvel of engineering, a vast, gleaming expanse that seemed to stretch into infinity. Every surface shimmered with an otherworldly light, a testament to the advanced technology of the spacefaring civilizations gathered here. The atmosphere was thick with tension, a volatile mix of hope and distrust as representatives from across the galaxy converged for a last-ditch effort at peace. As I, Kira of the Zilithian race, stood at the edge of the hall, my senses were overwhelmed by the emotions of those present. Being an empathic diplomat, I could feel the undercurrents of fear and anger that permeated the room. It was like trying to navigate through a storm, each emotion a wave threatening to pull me under. Beside me stood Ambassador Valen, my mentor and guide. Ambassador Valen's presence was a steadying force, his confidence in me unwavering. Ambassador Valen had orchestrated this summit, believing that my abilities could bridge the chasm of hatred that had formed between our species. As I prepared to address the gathered officials, I glanced across the room and locked eyes with Lieutenant Mark Hudson. Lieutenant Mark Hudson's glare was as cold as the void of space. A hardened soldier, Lieutenant Mark Hudson had fought in countless battles, each one deepening his hatred for aliens. I could feel Lieutenant Mark Hudson's disdain like a physical weight, a heavy cloak that threatened to smother any hope of reconciliation. Captain Sophia Reyes, Lieutenant Mark Hudson's commanding officer, stood nearby. Captain Sophia Reyes maintained a facade of professional calm, but beneath that, I sensed her inner turmoil. Captain Sophia Reyes was caught between her duty to her superiors and her growing belief that peace was possible, even necessary. The meeting began with Ambassador Valen stepping forward, his deep voice resonating through the hall. Esteemed representatives, today we stand at a crossroads. The path to peace is fraught with challenges, but it is a path we must take if we are to survive. Ambassador Valen's words hung in the air, a beacon of hope in the midst of uncertainty. I took a deep breath and stepped forward, ready to speak. I am Kyra of the Zilithian race, I began, my voice steady. I come to you not just as a diplomat, but as a bridge between our peoples. We share this galaxy, and we must find a way to coexist. Lieutenant Mark Hudson's expression hardened. Coexist? After everything your kind has done? The room fell silent, all eyes turning to Lieutenant Mark Hudson. I could feel the anger radiating from him, a fierce and bitter force. Lieutenant Hudson, I said, meeting his gaze, I understand your anger. I have seen the devastation, felt the loss. But this endless cycle of hatred will destroy us all. Lieutenant Mark Hudson's eyes narrowed. Words are cheap, Kyra. Actions matter. What guarantees do we have that your people won't betray us again? The challenge in Lieutenant Mark Hudson's voice was clear. I took another step forward, my heart pounding. There are no guarantees, Lieutenant Hudson. Trust must be built, not given freely. But I am willing to take the first step, to show you that peace is possible. Captain Sophia Reyes interjected, her voice calm but firm. Lieutenant Hudson, we're here to explore possibilities, not to relive past grievances. Lieutenant Mark Hudson's jaw tightened, but he said nothing more. I could sense Captain Sophia Reyes's internal struggle, her desire for peace clashing with her loyalty to her soldiers. As the discussions continued, the tension in the room ebbed and flowed. Some representatives were open to dialogue, while others remained staunchly opposed. It was a delicate dance, each word carefully chosen, each gesture scrutinized. At one point, a heated argument broke out between a human representative and a Zilithian delegate. Voices rose, accusations flew, and for a moment it seemed as though the entire summit would unravel. But Ambassador Valen stepped in, his calm demeanor defusing the situation. Enough, Ambassador Valen said firmly. We are here to find solutions, not to deepen divides. Let us remember why we are here. I felt a surge of gratitude for Ambassador Valen's leadership. Ambassador Valen had always been a guiding light, and in that moment, Ambassador Valen's steady hand was what kept the summit from descending into chaos. As the day wore on, I found myself increasingly drawn to Lieutenant Mark Hudson. Despite Lieutenant Mark Hudson's hostility, I could sense a deep pain, a wound that had never healed. I wanted to reach out to show Lieutenant Mark Hudson that not all Zilithians were enemies, but I knew that breaking through Lieutenant Mark Hudson's walls would be no easy task. During a brief recess, I approached Lieutenant Mark Hudson. "Lieutenant Hudson, may I speak with you?" Lieutenant Mark Hudson looked at me with suspicion. "What do you want, Kyra?" "I want to understand," I said. "I want to know what drives your hatred, so that maybe we can find a way to move past it." Lieutenant Mark Hudson's eyes flashed with anger. "You think you can just waltz in here and fix everything with your empathy? You have no idea what I've been through." "You're right," I admitted. "I don't. But I want to understand. Let me in, Lieutenant Hudson. Let me see." Lieutenant Mark Hudson hesitated, and for a moment I thought Lieutenant Mark Hudson might refuse. But then, with a reluctant nod, Lieutenant Mark Hudson said, "Fine, but don't expect me to forgive and forget." As I reached out with my empathic abilities, I felt the full weight of Lieutenant Mark Hudson's pen. Images flashed through my mind. Friends lost in battle, the devastation of war, the constant fear and uncertainty. It was overwhelming, and I staggered under the intensity of Lieutenant Mark Hudson's emotions. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I had no idea." Lieutenant Mark Hudson's expression softened, just for a moment. "No, you didn't. But now you do." Before I could respond, the recess ended and we returned to the hall. The discussions resumed, and I threw myself into the task at hand, determined to make a difference. The road to peace was long and arduous, but step by step, we were making progress. As the summit drew to a close for the day, I felt a glimmer of hope. It was fragile, easily shattered, but it was there, and for the first time, I believed that we might actually succeed. The following morning, the atmosphere on the eminence was markedly different. The previous day's discussions had left a mark, a subtle shift in attitudes. There was still a long way to go, but the seeds of understanding had been planted. I spent the early hours reviewing the day's agenda with Ambassador Valen. Ambassador Valen was optimistic, though Ambassador Valen never let his guard down completely. "Today is crucial, Kyra. We need to build on the progress we've made." I nodded, determination coursing through me. "I'm ready, Ambassador Valen." As the meeting commenced, I noticed a change in Lieutenant Mark Hudson. While Lieutenant Mark Hudson's hostility hadn't disappeared, it had tempered somewhat. I hoped that our brief exchange the previous day had opened a door, however slightly. The morning session was focused on trade agreements, a less contentious topic that allowed for more constructive dialogue. Captain Sophia Reyes played a key role, her pragmatic approach helping to bridge the gap between the more hardline representatives. During a break, Captain Sophia Reyes approached me. "Kira, can we talk?" I followed Captain Sophia Reyes to a quiet corner of the hall. "Of course, Captain Reyes. What's on your mind?" Captain Sophia Reyes looked around to ensure no one was within earshot. "I've been thinking about what you said to Lieutenant Hudson yesterday. You're right. Trust has to be built, and it won't happen overnight. But I want you to know that I believe in this process. I believe in you." Captain Sophia Reyes's words were a balm to my weary soul. "Thank you, Captain Reyes. That means a lot." Captain Sophia Reyes smiled, a rare sight. "Just keep doing what you're doing, Kyra. We'll get there." As the day progressed, the discussions turned to more contentious issues: territorial disputes, reparations, and the lingering mistrust that permeated every interaction. It was a minefield, each step fraught with potential disaster. One of the more heated exchanges involved a human representative demanding reparations for a Zilithian attack that had decimated a colony. The Zalithian delegate, a stern-faced woman named Zara, refused to accept responsibility, citing a different version of events. Voices rose, tempers flared, and it seemed as though the fragile peace we had built would crumble. I could feel the anger and frustration radiating from both sides, a maelstrom of emotions that threatened to engulf us all. I stepped forward, raising my hands to calm the room. Please, everyone, let's take a moment to breathe. We cannot solve our problems through anger and accusation. We must listen to each other, understand each other's pain. The room fell silent, all eyes on me. It was a daunting responsibility, but I knew that this was my role. Zara, your people have suffered, just as the humans have. We need to acknowledge that suffering, not dismiss it. And to the human representatives, I urge you to consider that the Zalithians have their own perspective on these events. Let us find a way to heal, rather than deepen our wounds. There was a murmur of agreement, and slowly the tension began to ease. It was a small victory, but a victory nonetheless. After the session, Lieutenant Mark Hudson approached me. "You handled that well, Kyra." I was surprised by Lieutenant Mark Hudson's compliment. "Thank you, Lieutenant Hudson. It's not easy, but it's necessary." Lieutenant Mark Hudson nodded. "I still have my doubts, but maybe there's a chance." I smiled, feeling a warmth spread through me. "That's all we need, Lieutenant Hudson. A chance." The final day of the summit arrived, and with it, a sense of urgency. We had made progress, but there were still significant hurdles to overcome. The atmosphere on the eminence was charged with anticipation and anxiety. Ambassador Valen gathered us early for a briefing. "Today we must address the most difficult issues: military disarmament and the establishment of a joint council. These are non-negotiable if we are to achieve lasting peace." I felt a knot of apprehension in my stomach. These topics were the most contentious, the ones that had the potential to derail everything we had worked for. But I also knew that they were crucial. As we took our places in the hall, I could feel the weight of expectation pressing down on me. This was it, the moment of truth. Ambassador Valen opened the session, laying out the proposed terms for disarmament. "We propose a phased reduction of military forces with independent monitors from neutral planets overseeing the process. This will ensure transparency and build trust." The room erupted in a cacophony of voices, some in support, others vehemently opposed. Lieutenant Mark Hudson was one of the latter. "You expect us to just lay down our arms after everything that's happened? That's madness." I stepped forward, trying to project calm and reason. "Lieutenant Hudson, no one is asking for unilateral disarmament. This is a mutual process designed to ensure the safety and security of all parties. We cannot continue to live in a state of perpetual war." Lieutenant Mark Hudson's expression was a mix of anger and frustration. "And what guarantees do we have that your people won't take advantage of this?" Ambassador Valen responded, his voice steady. "The guarantees lie in the process itself. The involvement of neutral monitors, the phased approach, it's all designed to prevent any one side from gaining an advantage." The discussions were long and arduous, each point debated with fervor. It was a test of endurance, both mental and emotional. But slowly, painfully, we began to find common ground. The proposal for a joint council was met with similar resistance. The idea of shared governance, of working together, was alien to many. But it was also the only way forward. Captain Sophia Reyes played a pivotal role in these discussions. Her pragmatic approach and ability to see both sides helped to bridge the gap. We need to stop thinking in terms of us versus them and start thinking about our shared future. This council is not about giving up power, it's about creating a sustainable path forward. By the end of the day, we had a tentative agreement. It was far from perfect, but it was a start. As the representatives began to disperse, there was a palpable sense of relief. We had done it. We had taken the first steps toward peace. In the weeks that followed, the agreements made on the eminence began to take shape. The process was slow and fraught with challenges, but progress was being made. The Joint Council was established, and the disarmament process began under the watchful eyes of neutral monitors. I continued to work closely with Ambassador Valen. Our efforts focused on maintaining the momentum we had built. There were setbacks, of course, old grievances resurfaced, and trust was fragile. But we persevered. Lieutenant Mark Hudson remained a constant presence, his skepticism never fully abating. But there were moments when I saw a glimmer of hope in his eyes, a sign that perhaps, deep down, he wanted this to succeed as much as I did. One evening, as I walked through the corridors of the Eminence, I found Lieutenant Mark Hudson staring out a viewport, the stars stretching into infinity. I approached quietly, sensing his need for solitude. "Beautiful, isn't it?" I said softly. Lieutenant Mark Hudson didn't turn, but I saw a flicker of acknowledgement. "Yeah, it's hard to believe we're out here, trying to fix everything." I stood beside Lieutenant Mark Hudson, the vastness of space a stark contrast to the turmoil we had faced. "It's worth it, though. For the future." Lieutenant Mark Hudson finally turned to face me. "Do you really believe that, Kyra? That we can change things?" I met Lieutenant Mark Hudson's gaze, seeing the vulnerability beneath the tough exterior. "I do, Lieutenant Hudson, because we have to. There's no other choice." Lieutenant Mark Hudson nodded slowly. "Maybe you're right. Maybe we can." It was a small moment, but it felt significant. A step toward healing, toward building the trust we so desperately needed. As the weeks turned into months, the efforts of the Joint Council began to bear fruit. There were still challenges, still moments of doubt and conflict. But there was also progress, and with each passing day, the bonds between our peoples grew stronger. One day, as I was reviewing reports in my quarters, Ambassador Valen called for me. "Kira, there's something you need to see." I followed Ambassador Valen to the observation deck, where a holographic projection displayed a message from a distant planet. It was a declaration of support for our peace efforts, a pledge to join the disarmament process and contribute to the Joint Council. "This is a significant step," Ambassador Valen said, his voice filled with pride. "Our work is paying off, Kira." I felt a swell of emotion, a mix of relief and hope. "Yes, Ambassador Valen, it is." The journey was far from over, but in that moment, I knew that we were on the right path. We were building a future where our children could live without the shadow of war, where understanding and cooperation could flourish. And as I looked out at the stars, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but it was a road worth traveling, for peace, for unity, and for the hope of a better tomorrow. Chapter 5. Months turned into years, and the work of the Joint Council continued. The process of rebuilding trust and cooperation was slow, but it was steady. The disarmament process proceeded, monitored diligently by the neutral parties. There were still flare-ups of tension, but they were increasingly the exception rather than the rule. Lieutenant Mark Hudson had become an integral part of the peacekeeping efforts. His transformation from a hardened soldier filled with hatred to a more understanding and hopeful individual was one of the many small miracles that marked our journey. One day, as I was walking through the bustling corridors of the newly established Galactic Council headquarters, I saw Lieutenant Mark Hudson speaking with a group of young recruits. His demeanor was still firm, but there was a warmth in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Captain Sophia Reyes joined me, a smile playing on her lips. "He's come a long way, hasn't he?" I nodded, feeling a surge of pride. "Yes, he has. We all have." Captain Sophia Reyes looked around, taking in the diverse faces that now populated the headquarters. "This is what it's all about, Kira. Building something new, something better." As we continued our walk, I felt a sense of accomplishment, but also a recognition of the work still to be done. There were still planets and factions that resisted the idea of unity, still those who clung to old hatreds. but the foundation had been laid, and it was strong. Later that evening, I met with Ambassador Valen in the council chambers. The room was empty, the silence a stark contrast to the usual bustle of activity. Ambassador Valen looked contemplative, his gaze distant. "Kira, do you remember when we first started this journey?" Ambassador Valen asked, his voice soft. I smiled, memories flooding back. "Of course, Ambassador Valen. It feels like a lifetime ago." Ambassador Valen nodded. "We've achieved so much, but we must remain vigilant. Peace is not a destination, it's a journey. We must continue to nurture it, protect it." I placed a hand on Ambassador Valen's arm, drawing strength from his presence. "I know, Ambassador Valen, and we will. Together." Ambassador Valen smiled, a rare expression of unguarded emotion. "I'm proud of you, Kira. You've grown into a remarkable leader." Tears stung my eyes, but I blinked them away. "Thank you, Ambassador Valen. I couldn't have done it without you." As we stood there, the future stretched out before us, filled with both challenges and possibilities. The path to peace was never easy, but it was a path worth walking, and with allies like Ambassador Valen, Lieutenant Mark Hudson, and Captain Sophia Reyes, I knew that we would continue to build a brighter, more unified galaxy. In the years that followed, the Galactic Council grew stronger, its influence spreading across the galaxy. The once fractured civilizations began to weave a new tapestry of cooperation and mutual respect. The scars of past conflicts remained, but they were healing, slowly but surely. Lieutenant Mark Hudson had become a respected figure within the Council, his journey from hatred to understanding serving as an inspiration to many. Captain Sophia Reyes continued to play a crucial role, her leadership and pragmatism helping to steer the Council through turbulent times. Ambassador Valen and I worked tirelessly, our bond growing stronger with each passing year. Together, we navigated the complexities of interstellar diplomacy, always striving to keep the flame of peace burning brightly. The Council convened an emergency session, the atmosphere tense. Representatives from various planets argued passionately, some calling for retaliation, others urging restraint. I stood, raising my voice to be heard over the din. "We cannot allow this act of violence to derail our efforts. Retaliation will only lead to more bloodshed. We must respond with strength, but also with wisdom." Lieutenant Mark Hudson spoke up, his voice carrying the weight of his experience. "Kira is right. We've come too far to let fear and anger dictate our actions. We need to find those responsible and bring them to justice, but we must not lose sight of our ultimate goal." Captain Sophia Reyes added, "We need to increase security at our outposts and work on de-radicalizing those who oppose us. This is a test of our resolve, and we must rise to the challenge." The Council agreed on a measured response, increasing security while launching a campaign to counter the fringe group's influence. It was a delicate balance, but it was necessary to prevent the situation from escalating. As we worked through the crisis, I felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on me. But I also felt the strength of our unity, the shared commitment to peace that bound us together. One evening, after a particularly grueling day, I found myself on the observation deck of the Council headquarters. The stars shone brightly, a reminder of the vastness of the galaxy and the enormity of our task. Lieutenant Mark Hudson joined me, his presence a comforting constant. "You did well today, Kira. It's not easy, but you handled it with grace." I sighed, the tension of the day easing slightly. "Thank you, Lieutenant Hudson. Sometimes it feels like we're just putting out fires, never really making progress." Lieutenant Mark Hudson placed a hand on my shoulder. "Progress is slow, but it's there. We've built something incredible, and we'll keep building it, one step at a time." As I looked out at the stars, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. The road to peace was long and arduous, but it was a road worth traveling. For the future, for unity, and for the hope of a better tomorrow. and with allies like Lieutenant Mark Hudson, Captain Sophia Reyes, and Ambassador Valen by my side, I knew that we would continue to forge a path toward a brighter, more unified galaxy.